So for some reason, my content involving my friend John has proved very popular on my channel, and so we are now going to draw John as requested in a 3/4 view. We're going to start as we've been starting with the cranium, thinking about it's close to being round, but it is somewhat foreshortened. So we are basically drawing this shape. Always think of the cranium extending down to the bottom of the nose and around the bottom of the ear. And you'll see that this form is not quite as elongated as the cranium from the side, not quite as round as the cranium from the front. It's in between. Now we're going to think of the line of the face coming straight down like that. Obviously his brow and his cheek looks like they're going to extend past that line, but this is the fact that this is vertical shows us that unlike the drawing we did last time, this pose is very the head is not tipped up or down, right? It's very straight up and down like that. So, and that's how I posed him. That's a little bit simpler than drawing those heads that are tipped one way or the other. We're going to think about proportions for a second. So if we look at where his hairline is, we look at where the brow line is, and we look at the bottom of the nose or the cranium, you see how that's about evenly divided. And if we add one more unit to the bottom, now we've got another unit the same size. So we are thinking of thirds from the hairline to the eyebrows to the nose and to the bottom of the chin. So his eyebrow is a little below his brow ridge, so that's not quite centered on the cranium. Can you see that? Because the hair line is not the top of the cranium. So if we imagine where the brow ridge is, which is a little higher, the eyebrows a little lower than that. So our thirds are breaking down like this. And remember, the reason we're doing that is to get the length of the face correct. So we've got 1, 2, 3. This is not the top of the skull, it's the hairline. 1, 2, 3. And make sure they're all the same. In a 3/4 view, as we've been studying, the ear hole is way towards the back of the cranium. It's not in the middle, so let's put that right about here. And that's going to guide us as we draw the jawline, which is like that. And the last thing we're going to, well, not the last thing, but let's visualize where this plane change takes place, sort of where the side of the face ends and the front of the face begins. And that's happening along something like this, and it's not exactly where the light ends in this lighting, but we're using the beginning of this half tone to determine that. I put my eye socket a little high. If this is the eyebrow, it's got to be a little lower. Sorry about that. And the neck is coming right up to the back of the cranium. Again, I'm saying this every time, but let's not put off the neck to the very end of the drawing. Let's always try to get our heads situated before we start doing features. And his collar is level with the mouth on this side, so that would be about here. And it's coming out of the center of his chin on this side, with the shoulder much further down on the right than it is on the left. Those things all make it easier to see the pose. So this has been a kind of generic start. We're going to get into some specifics now. The most important thing to measure, once again, is the bridge of the nose, location of the bridge of the nose. So the bridge of the nose is this space to the right of the bridge of the nose is about 1/8 or so of this space to the left of it. So make sure you put the bridge of the nose far enough to the right. See how this, you could fit about 8 of these into here. We measure that because every beginner wants to just put that bridge of the nose too close to the middle. It's like there's a magnetic force. It's just pulling you, wanting you to place it way closer to the middle than it is. Okay, let's go ahead and remember we're trying to trick our brains into thinking this is 3 dimensions. So let's shadow map the side of the head with the cast shadow on the neck. And I know this seems premature, but there's really no harm in getting this whole thing to read as a little bit of a volume. I know I'm shading right over the ear, and the ear's projecting into the light a little bit, but we can just erase that highlight later. And create a little shadow shape inside the bridge of the nose here and sort of fitting around the eye socket. And we've located the bottom of the nose, which is in shadow, so we can put a very general shadow shape here. And we have some idea where the mouth is going to be, about 1/3 of the way down. So we can do a very light shading to show just a little hint of the upper lip. And you see what just happened to the drawing? It's like your brain's telling you now that you're looking at a 3-dimensional form. And the sooner you can get that going, it doesn't mean we're stuck with any of these shapes. We can move them around. We can adjust them any way we want, but now it's a volume. It's not an abstract web of lines. It doesn't look like him, but it looks like a volume. I hope everyone can understand that distinction. So we're going to clean up these annotations and get more specific. So now we're going to look at some angles that are particular to John. So notice that we've got this sloping back at about 25 degrees, and then it turns to something that's closer to maybe 45 degrees. So let's block that in. So we're starting out thinking structurally. Now we're thinking in terms of blocking and angles and distances. So remember that brow ridge is going to extend out past the line of the face. So we're now accounting for that. You don't have to make your lines as dark as I'm making them. I draw so that you can see what I'm doing, but you're going to draw so you can see what you're doing. And since you're looking at it directly, you should be able to draw these much lighter. So this is coming down slightly below the bridge of the nose, which we already indicated. Now, it's very useful to always look for sets of parallel lines. You notice how this line here is parallel to this angle here, the angle of the cheek. So we already drew this angle, so that's going to help us make sure this angle is accurate, because it's the same angle. And you'll notice that this angle is the same angle in reverse, so we're just sort of mirroring that. And you'll also notice that a thing we can check is that the peak of the cheek and the brow are directly above each other, so make sure that these are coming out about the same amount. We've got this angle sloping down a little from the chin towards the neck. And we can start blocking in the shape of the hair now. We're going to go almost straight up from here and over this way. And this way. And this way. And if I extend this line down, notice it sort of hits the collar, so we're a little bit past the skull here. I had one of my first trolls on YouTube recently, and they looked at one of these drawings and they said, even with the guiding lines, he gets it wrong. And I don't know if my troll understands that I'm not using these guiding lines to do anything but to show you guys the sort of thinking that I do when I'm looking at something in real life. Like, I'm just, when I'm drawing from real life, I am checking where does the top of the ear fall in relation to the little line, this angle that I just made to show the inside of the eye socket, right? I'm asking myself, where does the bottom of the ear fall in relation to the bottom of the nose? So these guiding lines are not really a cheat for me. They are just instructive tool to show you how I'm thinking about things. So I'm obviously not taking any actual measurements. And that's why I love teaching this way, because it's evident to me from looking at years and years of student work that most students, until they learn, they wouldn't think to position the ear based on landmarks they've already found. They just sort of do it by instinct, and half the time the ear's in the wrong place. So okay. So now we've gotten a little more specific about some of the features. We should be seeing something that looks a little more like John in our drawings. We're going to use a negative space technique for a minute. We're going to look for this negative space that's formed between the nose and the line of the cheek. And the trick here is, let's just continue this all the way down to the little corner of the mouth. So what we're looking at is this space here, and this is where we're going to turn off our structural thinking, and we're just going to copy this shape as if we were copying an abstract form. And I always think of drawing the shape of a state, like drawing the shape of Florida or something. Like, few people have a really preconceived notion of what that shape is. And the best way to succeed at a passage like this in a drawing is just to forget it's an eye, forget it's a nose, and just draw the shape that you see. And we're not drawing the positive shape of the nose, we're drawing this space between the nose and the side of the cheek. And we're going to end up with something like this. And what you want to do is make sure your drawing is really close to your reference, and it really helps if they're the same size. So you see what I'm doing? I'm getting this shape as close as possible to the shape I'm copying, and if they're the same size and they're really close to each other, it's much easier to assess whether they're the same. And at this point, I feel like I need to open up a little more space on the side of the cheek. I'm going to go ahead and get this a little bit rounder. And I hope this makes sense to everyone. You see how the closer these get together, the easier it is to compare them and to perfect them. And you can achieve something similar by sliding your paper close to your screen and then taking a couple steps back and really comparing those shapes. A lot of art teachers, I think, overemphasize this idea of negative shapes. It's possible to do a whole drawing just looking at negative shapes. I like to start more structurally with anatomical forms, but then when I get to a passage like this, I find this is a very useful way to solve the problem. Okay. Now that I know where the bottom of this nose is, I can refine my shadow map a little bit, and I can see that this shadow is going to come up a little higher, and I can go ahead and place this shadow accent at the back of the nose. the nostril is going to be the hardest part. So let's take a minute here on the nostril. So the back of the nose is here, and that's lining up sort of with the center of this shadow shape behind the bridge of the nose. So we have this shape. We come straight down from the middle of that, and that's going to give us the position of the back of the nose. And how shall we think about this? Let's look for the center of this space. So we've got this overall space. If we drop a line through the middle of it, you can see that the nostril comes just a little bit into the front half and fills about a little more than half of the back half. And it almost touches that line. So, and it's sort of this ovoid shape like that. Now, frankly, on my drawing, this looks totally wrong. And I'm not going to second guess it, though. We did some measuring. I'm going to just proceed. I want to finish my first draft of this drawing before I start correcting stuff. So we're going to leave it and move on to finishing this eye. So we're going to go up to the bridge of the nose, arch around. Don't worry about getting some things wrong. We're going to go back and correct stuff, but let's just finish a first draft. That's something your English teachers are always telling you, don't rewrite your sentence 4 times before you finish the paragraph, and don't rewrite your paragraph 4 times before you finish a first draft of the paper. So here's that little shelf at the lower lid. The upper lid is almost horizontal. And the trick here is to represent, let's see how close I can come in here. So here's the lash line curving around and hitting the lash line along the bottom. But here is that inside of the lid. Most beginners just don't even draw that. And your eye drawing is not going to make any sense without that. There it is on the bottom. You see how much the inside of the eyelid we're seeing? And then to draw the iris, we're going to think about blocking in this shark tooth shape where this negative space again between the iris and the bridge of the nose, like that. You'll notice that just like in a profile, the pupil is not centered on the iris, it's towards the back of the iris. And that's because we're seeing through the iris into the iris is transparent. We're seeing through it into the pupil. Okay, don't let yourself fall behind. Just we're doing a quick first draft, so just let's block all this stuff in, and then we'll take a look at what we've done. So we're going to use some fractional thinking here. Here's the bottom of the nose. There's the line between the lips. First interval, and the bottom of the chin is way down here. So if we do second interval and third interval, we only end up here. So what that means is that although mouths are usually a third of the way down, John has a really strong chin, so his mouth is going to be less than a third of the way down. So it's going to be, I'm going to mark 1, 2, 3. It's about a third of the way to this shadow edge. Can you see that? So we already know where that shadow edge is, so we're going to go 1, 2, 3. That's going to give us a third of the way down. The philtrum is coming from a point, we've established the location of the nostril. The philtrum is coming from, it's sort of centered under the right-hand edge of the nostril. So there's the philtrum. And the first curve of the mouth is right under the philtrum, maybe just a little to the left of it. So that's going to be something like that. The receding curve of the mouth is going to be very short. And the side coming towards us is going to be relatively long. Here's another case where we could look at parallel lines. If I go from the outside of the ala to the corner of the mouth, it's just about parallel to the line to the side of the face. So this mouth is going to come out to about here and just a little further. The bottom lip is a little fuller than the upper lip. We're just going to indicate just a little shadow edge there. And then we're going to block in that other eye. I'm just going to shrink this eye a little bit. It's feeling just a little large to me. I don't know if you're seeing that in your drawings too, but I'm just going to make that. And I know I told you not to edit, but. Okay. So now we've got this line between the inside corner of the eye and the back of the nose. And we're going to use that parallel angle idea again. You see how it's the same as this angle over here? So we got this angle. And that's going to help us get to the location of the inside corner of the eye. Because this is a level-headed pose, the eyes are on a line like that. So that's going to mean our inside corner is going to be a little bit below that line. And we're going to block this eye in. It breaks down into a very simple trapezoid, basically four-sided figure like that. So we're going to block in those angles. And looking for these trapezoidal shapes is a great way to avoid doing what every beginner wants to do, which is just make a football shape for an eye. Okay, I'm gonna clean up the annotations again so we can see what we're doing. And we've got, this is the inside flap of the eyelid, thicker than the outside of the eyelid. There's the outside. And then the eyelid, the crease here follows this straight line, extends a little past the corner of the eye like that. Again, don't neglect this. See how wide this is right here? That's that inside form of the lid. And we can use that shark tooth idea again to draw this white of the negative space of the white of the eye, like that. And just a little bit of white space in front of that iris and the pupil towards the back again. Once again, don't neglect the lower lid. We can see between the end, where the white ends and the lash line is going to be a little space like that. And so this eye is feeling to me just a little bit too far back in his head. Just the iris maybe. I'm just gonna scoot it slightly to the right, but not much. Okay, let's put in an eyebrow. Just a little first shading where the dark of the eyebrow is. And we're going to go a little more definite on this shading inside the inside corner of the eye. And now that all the features are sort of blocked in, we're going to back up and see where we might have gone wrong. Okay. So, yeah, it feels like this eye's, both the eyes are just a little too big. You're gonna see different things in your drawings, but I'm gonna make this just a little smaller. And this eye also a little smaller, especially this upper lid. This is where you want to take a step back and look at your drawing and just see how it looks different from the reference. And move things, you're moving things just tiny, tiny amounts just to get things, to achieve a little more resemblance. And I'm seeing a need for just a little more chin. And maybe a little more height to the top of the head. top of the forehead at least. And you see how these microscopic changes improve at least the resemblance to John. Now, it is possible to just do a drawing where you measure everything so carefully that you're virtually guaranteed a resemblance on the first, at the first shot without any editing. But I'm trying to teach a slightly more spontaneous method where we're just going for it a little quicker and then using our brain's recognition systems to push and pull things around until we get a likeness. So the last thing I'm seeing here is this feels a little tight to me between the corner of the eye and the ear, so I'm gonna bump my ear back a little. I'm confident with how high up the ear is because we measured that, but I never really measured this distance here, so I'm just gonna bump the ear back about 1/4 of an inch and the back of the neck. And first shade this hair, and now we can really start to see enough of a likeness that we can see where the likeness is falling short. If you like where your ear is placed in your drawing, we're going to go ahead and do some ear details. So I located the ear hole here. We ended up moving it back a little. So when you know where your ear hole is, draw your tragus, overlapping it like that. Do the antitragus, opposite the tragus, and draw the helix coming up and around. And here's the challenge of a 3/4 view, because here we're seeing the wide, this is the outside of the helix, and here we're only seeing that little foreshortened ridge at the outside of the helix, and then we're seeing this shadow up inside the helix. Now we're coming from the antitragus, as usual, we're curving around, and the antihelix disappears behind the helix like that. And a little shadow, the triangular fossa, and a little shadow under the antihelix. Now we're sort of getting the point of fine-tuning our drawings. I'm going to go darker through this shadow at the side of the cheek. And as I said earlier, I need to erase the light on the helix and the antihelix. And don't be surprised if doing more shading on your drawing, sometimes it makes the drawing look worse because if there are any structural errors in the drawing, you're going to notice them more when you've shaded, because now you're seeing things in 3D and before you weren't. So that's not at all surprising. That's why we try to slip in a little shading near the beginning of the process. And one thing that's really not reading well in my drawing is this eye, but it's mainly, I think, because I've left the white of the eye white. It's kind of a beginner's mistake. We're going to pop a little shadow in along the top under the lid. We're also going to shade this side of the white of the eye where it's turning away from the light. Remember, the eyeball it's called an eyeball for a reason. It's a ball, and we want to shade it like we would shade a sphere. And you see how that eye looks a lot better with that shading? And we've got a little tiny bit of shadow at the inside of this eye socket. And we're not just darkening things. Sometimes it's also important to lighten things. I can see that I really went dark here because I was trying to block that form in, but that contour is very faint because the nose is in light and so is the cheek behind it. So we don't want to have that be so dark. We want to just, nor do we want it to be blocked in. So I'm erasing that and I'm going back over the line with a very delicate contour line, barely touching the paper. There is a little color to the cheek here. But we don't want to fall for, we don't want to read that as a shadow. If we want, what you can do, you can barely touch it to show a little redness, but it's not a shadow shape. So don't make it like one. I'm going to darken the nostril a little. So we're going to focus on balancing our darks. This tip of the nose is quite a bit darker than I drew it. It's a little more cast shadow under the nose. A little darker through the center of the philtrum. I need need a little more of that Cupid's bow movement to the line between the lips, so I'm just gonna tease that down just a little. Like a 32nd of an inch. And here again, the lip is really in full light, so we're gonna barely shade it, just to, and that's indicating not shadow, but color, a color change. Same with the lower lip. You see how there's a slight color change towards the outside. I dropped that shadow, or the bottom of the throat a little, so now I need to drop the shadow edge just a little to capture the size of the chin. I want to define the side plane of the nose with a little bit of a halftone. Not a shadow, just barely touching the paper. That's also going to help me define the top of the ala. And since my paper's gotten a little smudged, I can do a little erasing to bring out the light on the nose and a little bit on the top of that cheek. And a little bit of the light on the top of this cheekbone. So I feel like this eyelid is projecting just a little far past the eye. I'm going to bring that in a tiny bit. Get that eye to turn a little more. It was reading kind of flat. And this eye could be shaded a little more. And let me define a little darker shading along the bottom margin of the eyebrows. Eyebrows project out past the brow ridge a little, and so the bottom side's going to be a little darker than the top, which is in full light. If I was going to do anything with this portrait, I probably would be a little more careful not to smudge it so much with my hand as I'm drawing. And notice we can see this reflected light along the underside of the jaw. So we're going to shade some curved shading to bring out that core shadow, rounding up into the halftone on the side of the cheek. And then some darker shading under the reflected light where the jawline is casting a shadow onto the neck. And it's always important to recognize when you're drawing a cast shadow like this versus a form shadow. We also have a darkening of the cast shadow under the ear. Right here, I didn't shade the white of the eye quite enough yet. Notice that the white of the eye here is darker than this little line of the eyelid under it. So, no matter how much I preach about this, I've been hesitating to make the white of the eye dark enough. Very important not to leave it blank. And there's a little halftone under the lash line too. My goal here is to just make that little shelf right here read as lighter than everything that's around it. I'm dropping the corner of an eye a millimeter or so, which changes the expression a little bit. And getting quite dark right here, also darker on the right side of the iris. It's really important to, when you're using digital resources, to zoom in like you see me doing. And make sure that what you're drawing is larger in your, or at least as large in your frame of vision as your drawing itself. Your reference should be as big as your drawing. If it isn't, you're going to find it's much more challenging to get proportions correct. And we're going to wind up with a little bit of darkening of the hair. That's a local color darkening. His hair is in full light here, but it's obviously much darker than his skin, so we have to lighten it. And then we're going to bring out some of those clumps of hair with some shadow shapes, like that one. And get quite a bit darker towards the back of the head. Notice I'm using mainly my first shading direction here to build my darks. And then I'm going to go back in and second shade the way the hair is growing. And bring some of these hairs onto the hairline, or out past the hairline. Define the sideburn a little bit. And a little halftone along the side of the forehead while we're up here. And now we're going to back way out so we can adjust the values one last time. And I can see I need to go darker through in the eye socket. So to balance this drawing, I'm still popping a little too much light into that eye, so I'm going to unify that with my first shading and just push that eye back into the socket. Maybe darken the eyebrow a little bit. And this is the stage of the drawing where it's useful to squint a little. I never used to understand why my teachers would tell me to squint, because I can kind of make my eyes go out of focus without squinting, but when someone tells you to squint, what they mean is just get your eyes to defocus a little, no matter how you do it. And we've got the a little more dark under the neck and a little more dark through the core shadow. And at the back of the neck. And you see how much easier it is to make these assessments from a little further away, which you're going to achieve by stepping back from your work on a regular basis and trying to work a little more at arm's length. I'm working at a tabletop, so the way I'm backing up is from my work, is to minimize it on the screen and keep checking my drawing on the screen versus on the table. It's generally a bad practice to try to do too much work like you see me doing at a tabletop. But I get around the disadvantage by using the desktop camera to get a virtual distance from my work. Neck's a little too thick. And that's about going to do it for 3/4 view of John. Thanks again to John for modeling. last thing I'm going to do here is we're just going to pop a little highlight at the corner of the mouth. You see that? That also changes the expression a fair amount. Maybe even shade a very faint halftone around these highlights so they read a little more clearly. A little more halftone on the chin. And a little halftone on the receding side of the forehead so that we can bring out that highlight in the center of the forehead and a little halftone under the hairline. And one final thing that I notice that I'm really missing here is a halftone along the bottom of the brow ridge. If you think about how the brow ridge projects, the highlight along the top, it also is going to have a surface that turns under, away from the light. And it's going to end right here in the center of the bridge of the nose. So that's about gonna do it for today. I could spend another couple of hours on this, but I don't have time, and probably you don't either. So we're gonna end it right here. Thanks for watching.